Good day and welcome to a lesson in Namibian history. Okay, so there's a lot of controversy that's around where Namibia actually started and what actually happened. So the resources that I'm using is Wikipedia, as well as a few other history books. Because if you only follow one book, history is in the eye of the observer, which means you always get an objective view a subjective view and not an objective view. So we are using quite a few resources to actually pull through the history of Namibia to get the true history that surrounds Namibia. Okay, so today we're going to learn about where Namibia actually started. Now, I'm not talking about independence. I'm talking about which people lived in Namibia first. Okay, so we are looking at the San people. These are the San people, or what we call nowadays Bushman, which was derived from the Afrikaans word. When the British and the Dutch people took over South Africa, and we're looking at the Damara people. Okay, so the San people and the Damara people were the first people to live in southern Africa. They lived in South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia, and they were foragers, and they were hunters and gatherers, and they walked around and hunted and foraged for their food. The main place that we find evidence where they lived is in the Huns Mountains near Ice here in Namibia. Okay, so the people the scientists that found the evidence said that they lived in Namibia since 25,000 BC, which is before Christ, and which means they're really, really old people that lived in here. So the only original Namibians is the San people and the Damara people. Okay, so we're going to talk about the San people today, and with our next lesson, we'll handle the Damara people. So San were traditionally semi-nomadic. Semi-nomadic means that they moved around in certain seasons. Some seasons they would stick to one place, and other seasons they would move around a lot, depending on how they get their food and where they get their food from. Okay, so they were the places where they would live dependent on the amount of water they got, the game animals, and the edible plants. So please remember that, again, Namibia is a desert. There's a big desert lying in between Namibia, South Africa, and Botswana called the Kalahari, and that is where the Bushmen or the San people currently reside most of the time. So they know how to live in a desert country. Okay, so the San speak, or their ancestors spoke languages of the Ku, the Tu, and the Thi language families. They are the ancestors of the Bantu, Europeans, and Asian people. So they were one of the first people to live and to move around. So they moved so far around that they actually moved to Asia and they moved to Europe, and that's where the first Europeans and the first Asian come from, and that was from the San people. Now let's look at how they lived at home. The San lived at home. The children, they had no social duties at all. They could play around the whole day. They would play around, make jokes, make toys out of sticks and things, and they would just enjoy their life because they were seen as young and they need to be free. So a large amount of their time was spent in conversation, in joking, in making music, and learning sacred dances. The women of the family, they were leaders of their own family groups. They also make important family and group decisions, and they also, when they find a hole for water, a watering hole, then they can claim it as their families. But the women were mainly involved in gathering of food, and sometimes they even partook in the hunting. Men were the hunters and caretakers of their family. It usually depended on who's older between the man and the woman, who would be the leader of the family. So they always looked at who is the older person in the family, and that person would be the leader. Then water, because the people lived in desert countries, and we all know Namibia is very dry, right? Water is very, very, very important to the Sun life, even today. During long droughts, like the one that we had in the last few years, we had a 9-year drought in Namibia. They would make use of sip wells in order to collect water. So what they would do is they would find some damp ground or the white sand, and then they would dig and dig and dig until they hit water. And then they would use a type of grass that is hollow, like looks like a straw in the inside. They would suck the water out of that well, and then put that into an ostrich egg, which they will then keep and carry around with them so that they can have water wherever they are. Okay, then also what they also used a lot, as you can see in the picture over here, they used the bivalve plant. So they knew how this bivalve plant looks like, and you see the bush of the bivalve plant is very small, but the root is very, very big, because this plant had to survive in the desert where there's not a lot of water. So the bivalve is almost like a potato plant, but it had very, very big roots, very big potatoes, and they would cut open or peel the root, and they would scrape it and then squeeze it in their hands. And as they squeeze it in their hands, as you can see in this picture, the water would drip out, and then they would drink that water that comes from the bivalve plant. And that is how they survive during the drought season and during the dry seasons, to get water into their bodies. Their bodies were also very used to not having a lot of water. So their bodies were made in such a way that they can live with very little water at a time. So they didn't have water bottles like we do. Then let's look at the villages. The villages range in sturdiness from night rain shelters, which is in the warm spring, up to summer, and then the beginning of autumn. They would live in this tiny little shack here, which would allow for the cool wind to blow through. You see that window over there? And they would be able to break this down, carry the things with them as they move along while they are moving from one place to another place. Or they would have villages like this in the winter and the spring. And as you can see, the houses that they built here for winter and spring is very, very tightly packed, because they need to actually keep their warmth inside. So they would live in summer and autumn in these kind of houses, because they move around a lot. And in this winter and spring, when it's cold and there's not a lot of animals to hunt anymore, and there's not a lot of foraging happening anymore, then they would move into a more permanent kind of home, where they would stay for the whole 6 months. They would stay in one place, and they would actually live in that village. Okay, so most of the plants were dead and dormant during this time, during winter and spring, because remember, spring is when the plants start to grow, so they couldn't eat from the plants yet because the plants were not mature enough, so they stayed in one place. And they also dried out meat, like we have biltong. They dried out meat for the winter times so that they can have food for those 6 months. Okay, and then women gathered fruit, berries, tubers, bush onions, and other plant materials for the band's consumption, for the whole group's consumption. So they weren't looking at one person. They were actually working together to get enough food for the whole village. Okay, so what did they gather? Ostrich eggs are gathered, and the empty shells are used as water containers. Insects provided 10% of animal protein consumed. Can you see this person is eating a scorpion? That was one of the things that they ate. And then depending on the location, they consume between 18 and 104 species, which includes grasshoppers, beetles, caterpillars, moths, butterflies, and termites. You see here they eat some roots of plants. Here there's a lot of roots. This one almost looks like a potato or a sweet potato. And then here's their hunting with a small bow and arrow. This arrow is not very sharp. It can just pierce the animal's skin. And as it pierces the animal's skin, it releases the poison that they put on the tip of the bow, and then the animal dies. So that when they consume the animal, that poison is not deadly to them, that who's eating the meat, but it's deadly to the animal that they're killing. And you can see here, this person is eating a nice piece of honey. You can see all the bees around him as well. And then here they are eating a little bit of fruit. It looks like a makalani fruit, or like the blood orange, the monkey oranges that we get in Namibia. Okay, so women's traditional gathering gear is simple and effective. A hide sling, a blanket, and a cloak called a karos to carry the food. Firewood, smaller bags, and digging sticks, and perhaps a smaller version of a karakos to carry a baby. Okay, men and presumably women, when they accompanied them, hunt in long, laborious tracking excursions. So they went out in the morning and they came only back 2 days after, once they have killed something. And they kill the game using bow and arrows or spears tipped in diaphotism, which means that is the poison that they're using, which is a very slow-acting poison, which they get actually from a beetle's larva. So from a beetle's, the worm before it turns into a beetle, that is where they get that poison from. So they would kill the worms, and then they would dip their arrows into that slime that they've created, and that would be the poison that would be killing the animals. Okay, so where do we find Sun people nowadays? I know you and I, we might have seen a few Sun people walking around in Windhoek or in Namibia. So let's see. In 2017, Botswana was home to approximately 63,500 Sun, making it the country with the highest population. But 71,201 Sun people were found in Namibia in 2023, making it the country with the second highest portion of Sun people. So still, Sun people live in Botswana, South Africa, and Namibia, and you'll still see them today, even though they are the first people that lived in this country. Okay, so thank you so much for listening. We'll see you again for the next time.